Welcome to Inside Sponsorship, the show that provides sponsorship professionals with advice, insights and news so they can maximise their commercial programs and achieve best practice.
Snapchat isn't about capturing the traditional Kodak moment, it's about communicating with the full range of human emotion, not just what appears to be pretty or perfect. Those are the first words on the Snapchat blog, written by Evan Spiegel, Snapchat CEO and co-founder, and that was back in 2012 when Snapchat only worked on iOS devices and users could only send photos. Now, it seems like Snapchat has been around for longer than 5 years, but even in that short time, Snapchat has impacted social media significantly, and the popularity of ephemeral or disappearing content has grown significantly, and even bigger players like Facebook and Instagram have also moved into the space. Now, recently I read an article titled, "Here's How Snapchat Can Be Part of Your Sponsorship Inventory." And I thought to myself, in the context of everything else going on, do sponsorship managers on both sides really need to try and wrangle another digital channel in their inventory? And to help answer that question, I invited the author of that article, marketing and advertising consultant at Direct Contact Marketing, Carson McKee, on the show to explore Snapchat and how it is relevant and how we can make best use of it in sponsorship. Welcome to episode 48 of Inside Sponsorship. I'm your host, Daniel Loyston, and it's great to have you tuning into the show. Before we hear from Carson, though, we have a few shout-outs to get through. The first is to Steve Morton, Head of Corporate at Wolverhampton Wanderers, who sit top of the English Football Championship at the time of recording. Now, Steve sent me an email just to let me know, just catching up and tuned into episode 43 whilst in the car. Certainly kept my attention. Great listen. Keep up the good work. Thanks, Steve. Great to hear from you. Glad you loved that episode 43, where we had Spencer Nolan from Nielsen Sports on the show to discuss changing attention spans, prompting rights holders to rethink. Also getting in touch was Nick Takos, who is an MBA lecturer in sport management at Torrens University, Australia, part of Laureate University in Brazil. Nick is also a director on the Past Players and Officials Board at the Adelaide Crows, and Nick sent me a message on LinkedIn to say, "Hey Daniel, keep up the good work. I'm about to do some work with Team Sky during their Australian block, enjoying the insights. Nothing else is good in Australia. Thanks, mate." No, thank you, Nick. Glad you find the show useful. Thanks for getting in touch, and I'm sure the upcoming work with such a world-class outfit as Team Sky will no doubt be a highlight of the summer for you. Finally, a shout out to Tim Garrett, who I think has only recently started listening to the show because he sent me a message giving me the thumbs up for the show. And in his message, Tim also mentioned, "I'm one of the fittest persons on the planet and strongest endurance athletes in the world. I've just finished the hardest endurance race in the world and only the second person to actually complete it." So I was like, wow, that sounds interesting, and it piqued my interest. It sounded pretty impressive. So I plugged his name into Google, and wowee, just last month, as Tim mentioned, he became the second person to complete the world's most challenging endurance race. And I think it's important to go through this just so that you can understand the magnitude. What does it look like? Well, it's called Uberman 1, and it's an endurance race comprising a night swim start from Catalina Island off the coast of California. It's a 21-mile swim, or 33.8 kilometres, and it's considered to be one of the 7 most difficult ocean swims in the world. And then Tim got on his bike and he rode 400 miles, or 644 kilometres, from Palos Verde through the mountains and the canyons and desert in hot, arid conditions, and also against 30-mile-per-hour headwind gusts to bad water in Death Valley. Sounds lovely. 200 feet below sea level. And if that wasn't enough, the final component was a 135-mile or 217-kilometre run through the desert to Mount Whitney Portal. Now, Tim, it doesn't really seem apt to call that impressive. It doesn't seem a strong enough word. But I'm not really sure what to say about all that. It is simply stunning. And thanks for getting in touch and letting us know that you're enjoying the show. Now, normally in this part of the show, we'd hear from Mark or Sam and chat about one of their recent blogs, but the world has conspired against us and we couldn't make that happen for this episode. But never fear, we'll have either Sam or Mark back on the next episode and in the full swing of things again. As I mentioned earlier, I invited the author of Here's How Snapchat Can Be Part of Your Sponsorship Inventory on the show, and that's marketing and advertising consultant at Direct Contact Marketing, Carson McKee. Now, Carson has over 12 years of international brand experience with Ford, NFL, Denny's, NHL teams, Circle K agency, freelance and independent consultant roles, and he has also experience with small, startup and local brands as well. And his LinkedIn profile says that he is an outside-the-box thinker with demonstrated cliche-worthy provide value capabilities. Here's Carson. Carson McKee, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
We always kick off with a few easy icebreaker questions just to ease you into the process, and also, a little bit of fun, get the audience to get to know you a little bit better. If you could be anyone else in the world for a day, who would you be and why?
Anyone else in the world for one day. I'm not sure that there's a specific person that I would choose to be, but I'll tell you this. If I could be anybody else for a day, I'd be a woman. And the reason I say that is because there's a whole other side of human existence that is outside of my human experience. And so I think it'd be really interesting to experience what life would be like having, different organs and, experiencing what it's like to be a human woman. So I'm not sure I would pick anyone in particular, but I guess that's the way I would roll with that.
Yeah, very interesting answer. I think it would give you some pretty interesting perspective. Second icebreaker question is, what was your first ever job?
My first ever paid job that wasn't like being hired by my dad to wash windows at his business or something was working in fast food at Arby's restaurant. I was a beef slinger.
Now, you've progressed from there, obviously. You're a career marketer, if ever I've seen one. Can you give us a bit of a potted history of your roles with a focus on those that you've helped around sponsorship?
Sure. So I had a background in sales training and some related marketing experience early on. And when I was setting out on my own, I gravitated at this time, this is going to be mid 2000s, 2005. Onward, gravitated to using social to help push my own business, my own efforts on. I used it rather early and caught on rather quick, and that was one of the first opportunities that got me introduced to sports teams. I'd be working with clients in the National Hockey League. Some of these clients had larger interaction on Facebook and larger stats on their social than they were getting on their own previously monetized website. So I was able to, work with those teams, go in and consulting, and help them build out what that looked like, not just from a marketing standpoint, but also, organizing those things in terms of inventory. Like, what does a sponsorship package look like on Facebook, and how do we deal with issues of scale, and what sort of things could we do in contests and all that other kind of stuff that corporate partners really liked and loved the idea with, and sales teams struggled to sell and really conceptualize what they had. It's one thing if, in the hockey world, at least, if you have dasher board advertising, traditional, inventory where I've got 12 of these, that's pretty basic and easy to sell. But, Facebook is so scalable. And certainly in those days, it was really new territory. So it was really kind of building those and doing the training on the ground with teams to help build those assets up. Attach values to them, and then coach on the sales process directly with their partners. So that's really how it started.
A real focus on social and probably digital as well. They're fairly hard to separate. I came across your article, Here's How Snapchat Can Be Part of Your Sponsorship Inventory, and it really piqued my interest, and I thought it would be great and something that our listeners would love to hear about. And of course, we'll put a link to the article in the show notes for the listeners. We will jump into some user numbers in a minute, but suffice to say that Snapchat isn't in the same league as some of those other platforms that you mentioned, like Facebook, but also platforms like YouTube. So it is safe to assume that not everybody is as well versed with Snapchat as others. So can you provide us just with a bit of a rundown of Snapchat in terms of what it does? Let's just set the scene for those that don't know, and why it is different to other social platforms.
Sure, and that's a great question. Snapchat is the way people talk about Snapchat is exactly the same way people talked about social in general about 10 years ago. They knew it was a thing. They knew that young people were using it. They knew it mattered, but they weren't quite sure what to do. Over time, people have really, adopted things like Facebook, and you'll find a number of, the key demographics on a place like Snapchat being, primarily your 18 to 25. Those people aren't on Facebook because that's where their parents and grandparents are now. The people that used to not understand what this thing was or what to do with it, those are the people who are really dominating other social platforms today. The main thing behind what Snapchat brought to this game was the concept of ephemeral content. And as you may know, Snapchat is a platform in which your content doesn't last. If it's just between one or two users as a messaging platform, which is really how it started, the actual chat part of Snapchat, your messages disappeared when they were read. So it didn't stick around like text in your phone and things like that. And you could send images back and forth, but you could only view that image for up to 10 seconds and it would disappear. As the platform evolved and it grew, they then added different elements to make it a little more social networky. But it's really not a social network in the same way. It's more of a private network where you can really select the types of people or the exact people you want to send it to. And you can keep things really private. There's no viral aspect like you see on Facebook where you can see, so-and-so liked a photo or so-and-so shared a photo. But this doesn't simply exist on Snapchat. So that private, ephemeral kind of content was the real impact that was there. The challenge was, it became very widely used amongst a key youth demographic. The challenge for marketers was, what do we do with this? Like ephemeral content, that sounds like the worst thing ever. Right? Like you want me to build sponsorship around something that will disappear in 10 seconds? Snapchat's evolved the platform to the point where they do have a self-serve ad platform now. There's something called Snapchat Stories where you can post images, videos that do last up to 24 hours. But the other side of it is, people are adapting to the situation in which 24 hours is kind of a long time, and daily active users is a really important thing. And if you're looking at it daily, then 24 hours will do. You don't need to be up for long periods of time. A sustained campaign doesn't need to be stale over time. It can be different content at different times. So that's really what kind of sets it apart. And you've seen Instagram, i.e. Facebook, make those moves to quote unquote copy. I don't really like the term copy. It's a little schoolyard. And what that really represents is that, Instagram has to kind of, self-evolve and ephemeral content is really on trend. It's how people want to share. It doesn't always have to be the most well-crafted or most beautiful photo. Sometimes it can be quick, immediate, and fun. And that's what Snapchat does better than anybody else.
You touched on daily active users. What are Snapchat's daily active users, and is the user base growing or is it sort of stagnated? And I'm particularly interested in whether there's any certain areas in the world that are more heavy users or have more daily active users.
Right. So at the moment, and this is the problem that Wall Street seems to have with Snapchat, is it's not really growing in terms of its daily active users. I think it's floating around the 178 million worldwide mark right now, which, that's a lot of people. when you're comparing, things to Facebook, that's a 900-pound gorilla. And that's not really it's not really a fair fight in any way, shape, or form. 178 million daily active users is a lot of people. And it's in the real key, age demo again for young people. That's where they're spending a lot of their time. So while you'll go through headlines and things like that, and you'll see, stock is down, and like, is Snapchat going to die, and is Twitter dead, and all this kind of stuff. Well, it depends, right? People don't really remember that Facebook tanked until its ad platform matured, and people were able to go in there and use it. I can remember in the early days of doing partner content with some of the hockey teams I worked with. And you had to get permission even like from Facebook itself, like you happened to know somebody who was on the inside there to even run a contest. So there was really a lot of, turbulent early days for Facebook. It wasn't clocking money the way that it is now, back in 2010, for example. So I think those are really, important things to consider. When you look at it compared to others, it's not really a fair fight. And there's nothing to sneeze at with 170 plus million, daily active users. You look at another comparable platform like Twitter that's, also kind of coming into the same sort of, issues where, its stock is not doing well. There's acquisition and sales rumors and things like that, and people just aren't really using it the same way that they were. It doesn't really matter from that perspective. And the job of a marketer isn't really to predict, I don't think, what will happen in social. You have to be where your audience is. And if there are eyeballs there and there's value for Snapchat as an ad buy or as a place to be, then it should be part of where you're going. So it's really, part of a digital mix that I think is still really critical. It may be on trend to kind of bash Snapchat, but those are really strong numbers. Like, I wish I had a business that was struggling that poorly.
Yeah, I think it's a very good comment and insightful comment to talk about the volume, but not try and compare it to Facebook and Twitter, because that was going to probably be my next question: is how does it fit in against other platforms? But to be honest, if your target audience is hanging out there, it's not really a or proposition. It's most likely just going to be an and proposition. We can do Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat, but are certain demographics heavy? We kind of, you alluded to it a little bit earlier around younger people hanging out there and not so much on Facebook anymore. But are there certain demographics heavier users of Snapchat? Because the reason I ask is because I'm curious if certain types of brands are better placed than others to consider Snapchat, because sponsorship professionals are obviously dealing with brands day in, day out. Should they be raising this with certain types of brands based on certain types of active users on Snapchat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's again really strong with a younger demographic. Those are the people that are more interested in using it. Those are the people that have been building up their networks with their friends on there for some time now. And so when you see content hitting the platform now, it's just in a lot of a different presentation than you would see it on, any other, again, I hesitate to call it a social network, but I will for the purpose of our discussion, any other social network. And it's presented in a much different way. It's full screen portrait. You kind of very quickly move through at your own pace. So it's a very different presentation that lines up really well with a younger audience. So it's probably still, pound for pound, one of the best places to be in that regard, compared to other platforms. So I think that, comparing it, you're right. It's not like the best place to be. Is it an important place? I think absolutely it is, for sure.
How or when did you know that Snapchat wasn't just another passing social media platform fad, and that it was actually going to be something of significance in the market?
That's a really good question. I think that really comes up when, and a friend of mine, brought this up. Something's really important when somebody actually tells you about it. It's not when you see like an article in Mashable or something like that, like this is the next big, social thing and blah, blah, blah. But when it crosses over to when one of your friends pulls out their phone and says, hey, are you on this? That's when those things really start to kind of, hit my radar as this is now a mainstream situation, right? By the time it gets into popular culture, so to speak, that means it's already really well saturated. It's always, the younger people who are adopting these new digital platforms. And by the time that kind of makes its way up to the top, kind of bubbles to the surface and makes for jokes on late night TV or things like that, it's a thing, right? Like it's saturated now at those levels, and that makes it pretty solid.
It's funny you say about making jokes on late night TV. I still remember getting a bit nerdy here, but semi-excited when I first saw a TV show with tweets coming across the bottom. I was like, oh wow, this stuff's starting to merge. I still remember that probably about 7 or 8 years ago. So, Carson, I'm going to ask about some specific Snapchat use in sponsorship examples later on. But for now, removing the sponsorship focus, who uses the platform well, just generally in their marketing on the brand side? Or even just on the rights holder side, if it's not actually focused on sponsorship, just general, audience and member and fan engagement?
Sure. Well, there's a couple, quite famous examples, I think, that might cover off both of those situations, one being a sponsorship, and one being, more brand marketing. I think it was last year's Super Bowl, I believe. I'm 46 now, so maybe they're all blurring together. But I'm pretty sure it was last year when Gatorade had what Snapchat calls a lens. And a lens is where you aim your phone at your face, and it will morph your face into a different looking, character or situation or funny kind of crazy, scene. And then you can share that as a story or share that with your friends. Gatorade did one on the day of the Super Bowl, in which it was like you had won the Super Bowl as a coach, and they would dunk you in Gatorade in this Snapchat lens. And it was used, hundreds of millions of times. And they had some key people like Serena Williams use it. So they had some influencer strategy behind it, and it went as viral can get. And there was more people using that, lens on Super Bowl day than there was actually tuning in to the broadcast.
Wow.
That's a big deal, right? And that's a great example of a sponsorship activation in which it's not like, hey, Gatorade's like 2 for 1 down at your local Quickie Mart, right? That's not what that is. That's people interacting with the brand because they want to, because it's fun, because it's cool. And that's really hard to get to, you can't just say on Facebook, for example, Gatorade's cool and so are you. So interact with this post and then we're all cool together. It doesn't really work that way. But when you have the platform is really geared towards the medium is the message. It's all about, the way that Snapchat works, and the brand is represented in a very, impactful way, but it's kind of secondary because the Gatorade dunk is already a thing. It was brilliant and it worked extremely well. I'm sure it was also extremely expensive. On the other side, and not so sports-like and not so sponsorship, Taco Bell has done they were a very early adopter of Snapchat, and they've used a very similar thing with like a morphing face feature that would turn your face into a giant taco. And it was rad. It looked crazy and it was weird, but it was really fun. And that's a way that brands can interact with their audiences that was never really possible before. You hear about the future being VR and stuff like that. I really don't see us sitting around with our headsets on watching the Super Bowl. That just doesn't seem, that's like a 90s vision of the future. I don't think that's really coming down our way anytime soon. But AR, we already have it. We already live in an augmented reality world. We've already gone through Pokemon Go, and this is just another way of digital kind of seeping into daily life in an augmented reality standpoint. We just call it Snapchat, and it's just cool.
I love that example of the Gatorade dunk because it's such an embedded part of what is such a happy, well, for half of the fans and the team, competing teams and organisations, it's such a happy, such an iconic moment, but especially because an actual brand is so embedded in it, right? It's not the water dunk, it's not the Pepsi dunk, it's the Gatorade dunk. It's an iconic thing that happens, and bringing that to life and bringing people into it where it's at that point where it's big celebration, it's the climax of the season I think that's really fantastic, because and also unlucky for a lot of other brands because their brands aren't embedded in the culture of the sport like the Gatorade dunk is. Carson, why do you think Snapchat has an important role to play in sponsorship?
Well, I think another side of it is beyond the fact that those types of activations are extremely creative and extremely engaging. And they're very different. There is no comparable, really. We could talk about Instagram stories, but that's not really where I'm coming from here. I think that the reason that makes a ton of sense is because it's really untapped. And just like I started, during our discussion, the way people talk about Snapchat is like, well, I can see this is really important, but I don't know what the heck to do with it. And I think that there's still a lot of room for teams, for sponsors, for partners to be able to uncover really what that means. So I think there's a lot of potential there for people to be able to do it for the most part. And there are sophisticated, multi-user approaches that happens like with Major League Baseball advanced media and how they interact with NHL clients and things like that. That's very hands-on. But for the most part, it's all going down on your phone. It's not really about producing slick video and things like that. It's kind of immediate. And so that's great because you can do a ton, but it's also there's a risk factor there, it feels like, because it's just like someone and their phone. And you're now responsible for like high level brand communication. What does that look like? And, the very nature of the platform is kind of immediate, humorous, downright weird in some ways, and off the cuff. That gives you a lot of license. And so I think there's enough risk out there that it keeps people apprehensive. But I think there's also, on the other side, that's where opportunity lies. And I think for innovative individuals, that's a gift, right?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, because I hadn't considered it, where you say, there is that risk. It's just that person with a phone. And we quite often talk on this show and in the other content that we produce about how sponsorship professionals are really under-resourced. They're expected to do a lot. They're expected to achieve a lot. They're very busy. There's a lot of pressure. Sometimes there's not many people in the team. It can just be one or two people looking after that element. Snapchat can potentially just be another thing. And there is that governance that potentially needs to be considered, that it isn't just potentially, again, a junior person with a phone going, oh, this will look cool, because once it's out there, it's pretty hard to drag it back. So I think that's an insightful comment. Back in 2009, 2010, during my research, I noted that the job of assessing and pricing digital sponsorship activations was a big part of your work. I'm curious to know, 7 to 8 years on, has how people value digital activations actually changed that much, or do they still struggle with it?
I think that it still struggles to a certain degree. I can't speak to a number of different leagues or different industries. The work that I did was mostly rooted in the National Hockey League. I've done some work with NFL Canada as well, in terms of their social and how some of those things have been priced out. Back in those days, it was really, people were throwing darts, and they were throwing darts with low dollar values. And so that was kind of shocking to me. And it was kind of like, I'd be seeing, things come across the inbox that had like attachments of $500. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is a $5,000 situation. And it was just, they weren't really understanding the value of how to do it. So in the early days, it was a little more like the Wild West, and it was kind of, let's just figure it out, and let's kind of see what this looks like. Nowadays, there's a lot more guidance from leagues, and even though I haven't really been consulting at the team level in the NHL for a few years now, I know that in a league like that, there are guidelines that are provided, and there is more of a structure and situation to it, because things evolved so quickly, and the revenue that was at many different levels, from platform to team to sponsor, all that very quickly was recognized. I was just kind of at the forefront of that, and then everybody kind of caught up. So there is a lot more regimented. I don't want to say, well, maybe regimented, it's not the right word. A little more structure than there was in those days, but for the most part, and other things that maybe aren't like, big four North American sports, there's probably a ton of opportunity out there that I'm just not in touch with at that level with some of those people to see what those things look like. I've done some work at kind of minor league levels with teams here on this side, and same sort of thing. It was kind of more like, well, let's maybe have one less zero than we do at the major league level.
A lot of brands have shifted their sponsorship focus from just simply getting naming rights and signage and hospitality. Some of those things are still included, but they've developed and they're now taking to digital because they are using it in their wider marketing. We see a lot of rights holders who have struggled to not just price the digital aspects of their inventory, but actually integrate it properly into their sponsorship offerings rather than just something that you add on the side. Why do you think that is? Because effectively, sponsorship professionals should just, in theory, be giving brands what they want as part of their wider marketing.
Well, I think the first and easiest thing to do is to listen to your customer to a large degree and to be able to provide those sorts of things. I think those things still matter, right? That like naming rights and things like that. But I think those things matter less to fans. And so there's kind of a discussion surrounding, how sponsorship sales teams interact with their customers and their clients, to negotiate these sorts of things and assign values to those assets. And I think that really matters. But from the fan, I think this is common to all industries too. We forget sometimes that we're marketers, and we have a hard time seeing it again through the fans' eyes. But you're looking at a couple generations of buildings now where there's been a couple different names, and that's kind of a hard thing to deal with. And so the dollar values of something like that might be, very clear, and those things are stated. But that doesn't mean that some of those things will necessarily stick. How that translates digitally remains to be seen, and how you might, go about enacting that. And those could be very simple things from location tags and posts and stuff like that. But from the other side, the fan perspective, I think there's a challenge. There's a challenge in what that really means. And I think there's also a disconnect too with the fans understand that that's the business of the sport, and they understand that's kind of what has to happen. But there's also, there's not a lot of, I don't want to say the word passion because it's so overused. There's not a lot of emotional investment tied to some of those things. So I think it's less important from the fans' perspective. They understand that's just the cost of doing business today, that naming rights, for example, are just the way it rolls. But it's not, it doesn't go deeper than that for them. And I don't think it goes much farther than that.
Let's come down to some laser focus, a little bit of nitty gritty about how to use Snapchat well. What's the difference between lenses and filters?
Right. A filter is much the same as what you'd be using, what most people would think of on Instagram. It's a thing that you lay over your photograph or your video that just kind of, changes the look and feel of it. In Snapchat's way, it's more of a graphic overlay. So there could be text or images that takes your picture and kind of jazzes it up and provides, different kind of content as well as context around it. It could be, where you are. It could be other kind of fun things like that. So it just kind of, changes your photo that you're already taking. With a lens, it's a step further, and that's more of an augmented reality situation where it's literally, like in the example of the Taco Bell taco face, your head looks like a big taco, like a real taco. Like, and you can talk and you can sing and you can blink and it looks a bit like you, but you're really a taco. So a lens is kind of that kind of, deeper push into digital where you can be, really transformed. And there's lots of content up there now when you can be a meerkat or, the dancing hot dog or things like that, things that went recently, kind of viral on Snapchat. Those things are a different level where you're seeing digital really integrated into the real world setting, like your face.
How does a rights holder or a sponsoring brand go about organising a branded lens like you just spoke about then? Is there a cost involved apart from the development?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And those things have changed over the last, year or so. For some time, it used to be only it was kind of like a secret club at Snapchat. There was a few agencies, I think there was only like 7, that you could actually do business with Snapchat to buy those sorts of things. The way that it was costed out was because it was exclusive, that also made it, more expensive. So the other side of it was certain destinations or certain days would cost you more. For example, Super Bowl, to use that example again, that's going to be a more expensive day than a day like today when there's nothing really, major happening in that situation. So it used to be pretty closed. Like you could, request contact from Snapchat and your email will go off into a black hole, never to be seen again. But nowadays they have a self-service ad platform. So depending on the scope, if you're looking at national, international, what that looks like, the creative development behind it, those things can be, they can be quite expensive, relatively speaking.
What are some of the best practices or advice you can share about using lenses and filters in a sponsorship context?
Use it. This is the one thing that kind of astounds me that I see from people across marketing. It's like, oh, Snap, I don't get it, right? Well, have you tried it? Have you downloaded it? You don't get to say, I don't get it, so it doesn't matter. 178 million people use it every day. That matters. So download it, get it. It doesn't matter if you don't like it, but understand it. So play with it. Take weird little videos of, your dog, right? Or your own self, or just stuff, and get to know what it's like. Like anything in sales, this is like sales training 101. Like, you better know what you're selling. So if you have these, grand ideas of a digital mix, and you're going to have Snapchat activations and filters and things like this that are, geolocations and all that, you better know what you got, and you better know how it works. So it's free app. Last time I checked, download it, play around with it. It's not going on your Facebook unless you put it there. So you don't even have to have any friends connected to go and get to use it. So I think people should use it and kind of understand what it's like at a human level. I think that's the first and most important step.
Yeah, it's good. It's good advice. There's a nice, safe sort of area / sandbox where you can go and play and sort of develop your skills and understanding before you take it out into potentially the wider world. Know what you've got, right? I think it's really critical. You don't have to love it. Like, I've sent like 21,000 tweets in my life, but I don't tweet very much at all anymore. I've probably sent 5 or 6 in the past 6 months. But you got to know what it is. And even though I don't tweet anymore, there's a lot of tweets happening today. So for me to write that off would be kind of ridiculous. 100% agreed. Now, you've given some great examples around Gatorade, Super Bowl, Taco Heads and Taco Bell. Those executions, parties would be measuring their success, like all good sponsorship and marketing professionals. What does Snapchat provide in terms of engagement and geographic or even demographic metrics that might justify that it is actually a standalone asset or benefit or inventory that a rights holder can actually offer a sponsor?
Right. Previously, you were able to, in the past year, 2 years, you were able to build filters, geolocation filters that you could, draw a fence around on a Google map, essentially. And you'd be able to place that somewhere, and you would get some really basic metrics that went along with that in terms of usage and impressions and things like that. So that was obviously, usage is pretty clear, how many people actually used your filter, and then how many people saw their use of it. So quite basic, surfacey kind of stuff. But again, just like the rise of social a decade ago, that kind of surfacey stuff was very fine, both internally and with partners at that level. Since, I guess, the summer-ish of this year, at least, halfway through this year, the self-serve ad platform has opened up. And much like what happens on the Facebook side when you're, buying and creating ads there's a lot more numbers there that would really assist in those processes of helping, provide value and show usage and show interaction and things like that to help people out.
The article that I read and which piqued my interest and sparked me getting in contact to invite you on the show was, here's how Snapchat can be part of your sponsorship inventory. The flip side is, why would a rights holder go the other way and shy away from using Snapchat?
Mm-hmm. Well, like I mentioned before, depending on the type of execution, the way that you're looking to use it, where it could be as simple as an individual with a phone who's responsible for capturing something, there's inherently a bit more risk with something like that. It's not as planned. It's not like we're going to, go film a video, edit it, and then we're going to post that to Facebook or Instagram when we're ready to. But that's the point of what makes Snapchat different, fun, and great. So some of those, risk reasons would be, I think some people still struggle with the idea of ephemeral content, the idea that won't be there after 24 hours. But, in the thumb scroll reality of social today, how often do you go back? Like, how often do you visit someone's entire Instagram profile? You just kind of roll through, right? Or Facebook. How often do you visit the page of your sponsor or the team? They consume you via the posts and newsfeed, regardless of whatever platform it is. So I think that there's some barriers. It's still kind of new, it's still kind of the rogue out there. I think a lot of the news out there regarding stock performance might also, because the stock didn't perform, really hot, that's going to keep people away. But again, what sort of daily active user growth we're looking at here? Like, 178 million people, it's quite a few. And if it's not growing to 500, million by now, that's okay. People still buy radio ads, right? Radio usage isn't exploding right now. It's just kind of part of the media mix, and radio is a very valid place to advertise and to market for sports and for lots of other things. It's just, maybe a little less sexy these days, but there's still a ton of value there.
And people still consume sports and listen to live broadcasts through the radio, whether it's digital or not.
Absolutely. I listened to a Monday Night Football game on the radio just this week.
Is it dangerous for rights holders? Let's say they think, yep, we're in with Snapchat. We've had that safe play. We think we can execute it. We've got some governance so that we're not, creating content that, is risky. Is it dangerous for a rights holder to be pitching Snapchat to a brand if that brand doesn't actually use Snapchat already as part of their wider marketing?
Not necessarily, no. I think it's still important in any dissemination. It's still important to get in front of younger audiences, and like I said, it's not really a social network in that way. So if you were talking about Facebook, I'd say, yeah, you should probably have a Facebook page too if you're going to be active there, because you're going to want you're going to want to drive people back to your own stuff, basically. But in a situation like this, there's not a lot of reasons and there's not a lot of ways that they can interact with your content on Snapchat and then go, quote unquote, back to you. But they could find you there and they could follow you there, and that's okay and that's fine. But it's also simply a place where their attention is. And in some cases, you might want to have more gravity, for lack of a better term, to that attention. And in a place like Snapchat, which is a little more, kind of levity and a little more fun, getting their attention and getting them involved, I think that's really more important than being on the platform too in that way. And we'll see how things evolve. Things always change the way that we use. I remember before you could even edit a Facebook post, and you had to delete that kind of stuff. So, just because you're not there doesn't mean you shouldn't do it and dip a toe in the water. I call it the hot tub approach. Nobody cannonballs into a hot tub. Maybe some people, I don't know, but generally, right? It's like a toe, ankle, knee, waist, and then you kind of ease it up to your neck, right? So start, see what you can do there. Understand the measurement, understand the feedback, and dabble in it, and kind of grow with it. When we started doing all this with Facebook and Twitter, it wasn't like it was all hands on deck and this was going to be everything. We tried it and we were right. It's where the audience was. It's where the eyeballs were. It's where the internet was going. Facebook is the internet to many, many people today. So try it.
Love the hot tub analogy. Let's continue. Let's continue to run with that, because I mentioned earlier, and it's a fairly common theme in our content that we produce around how sponsorship professionals are some of the most talented people in an organisation, not least because they're expected to get so much done, yet they're quite often under-resourced and sometimes they don't have as much experience as other people. With the hot tub analogy, when the next digital platform comes along, and clearly it is or will become an important platform for sponsorship, should rights holders be trying to dabble in it early on, stick that toe in the hot tub early on and lead and maybe get that first mover or early mover advantage, or should they wait until a few other people are in the hot tub before they stick their toe in?
Yes to both. I don't think there's a right.
Just get in the hot tub.
Just get in the hot tub. Everybody in. The way I look at that, honestly, is it's the role of the marketers. And I get resources and things like that. And this is kind of a hybrid world now where you're in sponsorship sales, but now you got to know Snapchat too, and you got to be able to post on behalf of the brand. There's a lot of, it's not as cut and dry role-wise between marketing and sales and execution as it used to be. So that's part of it. But I think the answer to your question lies in the role of the marketer, the role of the salesperson, and the role of the individual, where if something new comes along and you hear about it, download it, try it, dabble in it, see what happens. Keep your finger on the pulse. It's important to be, when something's going to break and is a big deal, that's awesome to be in early on it. And that's not going to happen all the time. And you might, dabble here and there, and you do 10 things, but only one or two of them pop. That's not bad, right? No one's going to remember about your Peach strategy when Peach was the next big social network, 15 minutes ago, or when Ello came as the anti-Facebook 2 or 3 years ago, or whenever that was. People have short memories. They forget. In fact, today was my 10th anniversary day on Twitter. So Twitter sent me a message going, "Hey, you've been with us 10 years. That's a big deal." Back then, 10 years ago, there was no mobile app, right? I had a BlackBerry, and you had to, if you wanted to tweet mobilely, you had to do it via SMS. You connected your phone to the platform, and you would basically text the number, and that would post to your Twitter account, right? So things happen. I can remember having a discussion with people about Twitter with NHL teams, and it was you know what? If the numbers get to 5,000, then it'll kind of matter for us. It did okay, right? They have over 1 million followers now, but in the early days, it was kind of a risk. So take a couple risks, but don't put all your eggs in one basket. And if you can find some ways to be innovative, and if you can explore and you can find stuff out as an individual, then you're in a really good position to be able to put that stuff forward into business proposals or pitches, and then understand how to drive business value from there, right? Sure. That's right. Right, exactly. And sometimes you're going to be right, and sometimes it won't matter. You look at an app like Vine, Vine brought video to Twitter, and that was a big deal. And then Vine went away because video became this standard form of content on social. You still post photos, and you can just post words if you want, but nobody does that anymore. Video, we don't even think about video as being video. It's just, there's so-and-so on Instagram now. And, you don't think that it's a video from a content perspective. So if you went all in on Vine and you were so busy, investing everything in your Vine network, well, it went away. This is all rented land.
Yes.
Right? So you don't build your mansion there. Keep driving everybody back to the assets that you own, but recognize that this is where the attention lies. And that's really the goal. And attention is a constantly moving focus. Nothing stays super hot for super long. It's always kind of a moving thing. Instagram is everything right now. I would say it's probably the most important place where everybody is. Talk to me next year. I don't even know, right? We could still be talking about Instagram, but maybe it's somewhere or something else.
So the next question might be a bit tough. What does the future hold for Snapchat? Will it be much the same, or do you actually see it really evolving or even integrating with other platforms maybe?
Well, there's two things on that. One is I'm not big on predictions. I'd rather be more interested in what the marketplace is doing. I don't want to have to predict what the company will do. I want to know what people are doing and where their eyeballs are. So that's one. The other side of that is a company like Snapchat that is publicly traded now. They have to evolve. There is shareholder value. There are other factors now beyond just an innovative startup that wanted to kind of shake the foundations of what it meant to share content and talk to their friends. It's a different thing, but they do have to kind of evolve. They do have a responsibility to turn a profit. So it's going to shift and change. What that becomes, who knows? It may make Snapchat stronger. It may grow in its importance. You look at how Facebook has changed over the last 10 years alone. It used to just be, your photo updates, your vacations, things like that. Now we have specific, program content on Facebook. It's evolved dramatically over the last 10 years. So who's to say? But I'd probably be more worried to focus on what's happening on a daily basis than look at, will this matter in a year? Because things change so quickly in this industry that, that's probably not the best use of your time. It's just kind of keep seeing what's happening, keep your boots on the ground, so to speak, keep trying new things like that and see where it goes.
Great advice. Great overall chat. Carson, if people want to get in touch with you, connect on social, what can they do?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram and Snapchat at firstname.lastname, CARSON.MCKEE, and you'll be able to hit me up there anytime. Carson
McKee, consultant and speaker at Direct Contact Marketing, thank you so much for taking us inside Snapchat and sponsorship.
It's my pleasure. I really enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you.
Cracking chat with Carson, some great examples, some awesome insights, and plenty of food for thought for sponsorship managers, I think, on both sides of the fence. As Carson mentioned, you can connect with him on those social channels, and of course, all the links are in the show notes at sponserve.net. If you'd love a shout out, just like Steve, Nick, and Tim, then make sure you get in touch and I'll make it happen for you. I know I say it in most episodes, but we really do love getting little messages from you guys, even if it is just to say, hi, I listened to the show. That's about all we have time for in episode 48. If you want to connect with me, you can do so on LinkedIn. Just search for Daniel Oyston or drop me an email using daniel@sponserve.net or on Twitter using the handle @sponserve. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter and Instagram. Just search for Sponserve. Until next time, I'm Daniel Oyston. Thanks for listening to Inside Sponsorship.
Thanks for listening to the show. For more episodes, blogs and resources, head to sponserve.net or search for Sponserve on Facebook, Twitter or LinkedIn.